Our next speaker is Tom Fitzwater, who is the Executive Director, Supply Chain at TM Insight. As supply chains evolve to meet growing consumer demand, major organizations seek Tom and his team's expertise to lead their companies through major supply chain transformations. Over his 15-year career, Tom has become a recognized leader in the supply chain sector, having led the design and delivery of some of the most advanced automated distribution center networks across Australia and New Zealand. Please welcome your next speaker, Tom Fitzwater.
All right, well, welcome, and thank you for your time today. So just to introduce myself, my name's Tom Fitzwater. I'm the Executive Supply Chain Director at TM Insight. For those of you who don't know TM Insight, we're a consulting business that run across supply chain, property and project services. We're currently at 110 people, and we typically work across Australia, New Zealand and Asia. We work with a number of different industries across many different client types around retail, FMCG and others. And I guess over our journey, we've put a lot of focus on key areas around network design, DC design, overall automation design, and most importantly, supply chain strategy. So today, I'm going to be talking to you in more detail around, reinventing operations in 2021 and beyond. So reinventing operations in 2021 and beyond. The next generation of warehouse transformations may not be what we expected. We were seeing a large trend where scaling warehouses up was key. We saw large-scale automation, end-to-end automation, typically becoming, front of mind. Throughout some of the changes that we've seen over the last year, this has potentially been revised and people are looking at different options around this change. The growth of online is obviously there and we all know this. However, what we've seen now in the last year is pretty much what we saw over a couple of months is really the same impact as what we could have seen over many, many years. Last year we predicted online sales would ramp up to 30% per annum for the next 5 years. This is now looking very conservative and probably a major understatement. Companies like Australia Post reported to have delivered, around 20% increase in the year before. I couldn't imagine there's any operation out there that can deal with that sort of a change. There was no doubt that the clients and consumers last year may have been forgiving in this, whether there be late orders, missed orders, errors. However, moving forward, this isn't going to be the case, and consumers are going to want it now. They're going to want it right, and this is where already organisations are starting to plan this into their future strategy. Organisations now must have a clear business strategy linked to their digital strategy. It starts with the business strategy, but then digital is becoming key. This change in online is having such a significant impact to operations and fulfilment models. Therefore, it has to be understood. This ultimately will drive their warehousing needs and fulfilment requirements. Consumer needs are changing, demand is changing. These requirements will have impact all of these areas within any operation. Typically, we've always talked about network modelling being around DC modelling, national network models, regional network models, and then moving more into online network models. These have really now become obsolete. It's all about an omni-network channel now. This has to be looked at that point, and every part of the network needs to be understood in order to how can I fulfill these orders to my clients. This then strategy overall will help this design and fulfillment strategy. Where should that product be? What's the method of delivery? And how's it going to get there? When we try to understand facilities of the future, it's obviously all about fit for purpose. I mean, potentially easier said than done, and it may be quite obvious. However, it's very important that by understanding that strategy, by understanding what the client needs, what this operational profile is doing, and then how this links to my digital strategy will have a major impact on that design. Online operating profiles can have significant impact to any warehouse and operation. potentially going from a typical B2B order of 10 units per order to an online order of 2. It has significant change to how you've actually set that site up. Things around SKU profiles, SKU changes, increases in this, all of this will have an impact, and overall may have a significant direct impact to labour and costs. We still see national distribution centres versus regional centres out there, and ultimately, in many cases, there's very much an argument for needing potentially both. However, I guess what we're seeing now is the level of future operational change here must be considered into this process. So when we understand our B2B requirements and B2C requirements, what impact does that have on fulfilment? And how critical is that in the design? The difference, as I mentioned before, between an order of 2 units to 10 could have significant change to space, staging, MHE type, whether that be manual or automated. An automation solution that's designed to pick 2 units an order versus 10 could actually be redundant if that change was to occur. One of the most critical areas as well that we see these days is around access. So not only access internally, which is often the key focus of most operations, but external. I mean, what we see with online operations now, just the need for that external space, being smaller vehicles, whether they be outsourced vehicles, insourced, and just overall traffic management and volume of those vehicles during peaks. This gives a significant requirement to the external areas of any site, as well as access to those, whether it be docks and other areas. What we typically saw with DCs over time is, a good site coverage on any particular area of land would be around 60%. What we're seeing with these online facilities, whether they be dark stores, spokes, possibly even micro fulfilment centres, we're looking at closer to 20%. So the uptake of land is very different. Therefore, if you were to potentially convert your typical DC into and have very high online growth, this could have massive impacts to your operation and ultimately drive a lot of cost in there. We also see that, I guess within this strategic planning becomes critical, in understanding, okay, what is the consumer doing and how is this driving it? There is no doubt, as I mentioned earlier, that this has to start from the strategy phase and move into the detailed network phase. By understanding your network potentially drives what these fulfilment centres need to look like, how many I need, what sort of MHE should I need, should they be automated? And this has to be understood from the start. It can't be done later. Once again, it's all about the omni-channel network. Warehouses now need to be designed with agility in mind. The F word is the most common word used at a board level today when planning for the future. No, this is not probably the word that you're all thinking, but this is flexibility. Flexibility is key. There is not one project we're working on that we don't get drilled into how can this site become flexible for the future. The unknowns, we're never going to know what we're going to be doing in potentially 2 years from now. Any change in what we've designed today is going to have an overall impact to that site. So how do we then plan that into it? We need to de-risk what we're doing for the future and potentially building and designing that lean operating model, which was, I guess, the directive here of what we've all wanted to do within leaning and optimizing supply chains could potentially hurt us into the future. So do we add some cost into what we're doing now in order to become flexible and therefore for this to mitigate any further risk? I guess when designing any operation, whether it be a current operation, trying to redo and optimize, or from scratch, it's very important now, and this is another area that we see in every project that we do, is around sensitivity analysis. How can I understand what sensitivities will ultimately drive what I need? And ultimately, if I'm going to grow by 10% or SKU count's going to go up by another 50%, what does this do? Where does this thing break? and ultimately, do this in the planning phases so you can get it right. Once again, it's all about flexibility. Automation is still key, but it's got to be the right automation. Automation, still remains highly relevant to operations today. And absolutely, people should be looking at automation and understanding how this can support their operation profile and ultimately, reduce costs within their solution. High bay ASRS, is still very valid, and this is, quite strong fixed automation. Robotic unit picking makes a lot of sense for organisations as well. But what we are seeing now is some organisations moving towards more flexible automation, as you can see in the video here, being an AMR solution. Choosing the right automation is critical. And once again, it's about fit for purpose. It starts at that detailed network modelling stage, and it's about assessing how this fits into my overall business strategy. Typical design year for automation is 10 years. That's a bloody long time. At the end of the day, in 2 years' time, we may be in a different spot. So how do we de-risk this and how do we get it right? Choosing automation, it's very important to work through a very detailed approach that's understanding what you're currently doing today, and then overall laying what are we going to be doing into the future. Do we see a big increase in these typical SKUs in this category? Do we think we're going to acquire another business? All of these things have to be considered because they could have significant impacts on whether that automation will work into the future. Once again, it's around understanding those sensitivities and doing that sensitivity analysis. More volatility in the customer demand profile, pretty obvious, but this will always lead, and this is now giving some nervousness around fixed automation. Fixed automation based on a profile today might be exactly what the business needs. However, are you pigeonholing yourself for the future? And if things were to change and significant change, are you going to get yourself into trouble? We've definitely seen greater uptake in mobile automation. And, for some of the larger scale projects we've currently been working on, even though some fixed automation may have given the biggest bang for the buck and best business case, the mobile automation is still actually won out in the end. And this is due to all the things I've talked about, having that future flexibility and de-risking, I guess, the overall site, looking into the unknowns. Also, it's important to understand that you may not be able to plan for extremes. I mean, what we saw last year with COVID was an extreme. And yes, online is here to stay and the growth of online will continue. However, when we look at some of the FMCG businesses selling staples and toilet paper and these sorts of things, it may not be useful to be planning that sort of peak into your operation today. There's nothing wrong with having a plan B. There's nothing wrong with looking at an outsourced model if we get to that, but it's about having a plan. By building in some of those peaks and outliers into an operation could ultimately drive costs and not be the right thing for the business. Key here is automation is still relevant and it must be considered in any operation. And if the business case stacks up, it is very important for organisations to consider. So the key takeaways from today that I just wanted to touch on are the rapid adoption of e-commerce is here to stay. We all know that this is absolutely driving the change within facilities, not only networks, but then the design of the fulfilment. It's important to understand that strategy and then link that to the overall design. Don't stress about planning outliers in demand into the operation. As I mentioned before, there's some things that are too extreme. You're just going to build cost into it and just have a plan B for these. Fit for purpose design and detailed network analysis is critical. It has to start at the strategy. As I said, then that links to a digital strategy. And then overall, there's a network model there that will give you the outcomes of what your fulfillment centres need, whether they be automated, whether they be manual, and how many do I need. Sensitivity, scenario analysis and modelling. This is critical. And the demand in the projects we're doing for this now, is next level. Without having any sensitivity analysis, business cases are just not getting signed off. So this is absolutely critical in any strategic planning process or project you go for, that this is set out and this is then presented with the final business case. Automation is still key, but it's not about overall blanket automation and let's automate everything. It's got to be right, and you've got to do plenty of detailed work in this, but ultimately understand where are my breaking points on this. Don't be afraid to go now and change later. You can overdo this. You can absolutely overanalyze certain situations, whether they be, where we are today, where we're going to go to. I mean, we've seen many clients that we work with over time spend too long on this. A year down the track, you're still working on it. Potentially the strategy is now obsolete. You can go now and build flexibility into what's going to happen. And the winners will act quickly. Move now, go quickly. Don't sit around, because ultimately your competitors are doing it. People out there are already putting these strategies and mobilizing this in place. You will just get left behind. So thank you for your time today. I hope some of the things I touched on were insightful. If there's anything you wanted to talk to me about in particular, more than happy to. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you.